Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Sci Talks 2.0. As always, my name is Dr. Jack Saxenian, and today I want to talk about some of the issues and concerns you guys have related to the coronavirus. So, if everybody that's here could give a thumbs up that they can hear me and see me, and that way you guys are able to get the whole picture, please let me know, and I will get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Sci Talks 2.0. As always, my name is Dr. Hello, everybody. Please let me know if you guys could hear me. That way I can get started. Let's see. Uh, thank you, Milan John. Thank you so much. I will hopefully be able to address some of the concerns and questions you guys have. And I know there's been a lot of um, internet YouTube videos and so what, some similar things going around. So I want to be able to address all of them and be able to hopefully put some of your concerns. In the meantime, is everybody staying home, being safe? If you guys are, give it a thumbs up because I want to hear that you guys are doing great. Awesome. Everybody could hear me. So welcome, everybody. I will get started. So today, I normally don't introduce myself with my background, but because today I want to speak about a specific person and the stories he's been putting out, which are completely junk, I wanted to give my credentials so that you guys could know when you're listening to it, to be able to compare what I'm saying to what he had been saying, right? So some of you and most of you guys already know me, but I did my undergraduate at UCLA in neuroscience and molecular cell and developmental biology. I spent all of my undergraduate years since I was almost 17 years old, and I don't want to date myself, but doing research in various aspects of science, including developmental biology, neurosciences, brain tumors. Subsequently, I joined a group studying the immune system and how it relates to fighting brain tumors. And then after that, I did my PhD in a very prominent immunology laboratory. Even though my project wasn't directly immunology, my mentor was one of the students of Dr. Charlie Janeway. Janeway is considered to be the father of immunology, right? And he literally wrote the textbook on the immune system. So my mentor was his graduate student, and he did his research on the T cell receptor, which later on was awarded a Nobel Prize for to a couple of other investigators. So after doing my PhD and continuing to do research in various aspects of development and cancer, and including immunology, I went off to medical school. After finishing medical school, I'm continuing my training in the field of neurology. But I've done exhaustive research on various aspects of the immune system, the brain, and the body in various parts throughout my life. I have over 30 publications in top journals, peer-reviewed journals, right? That means in order to get it published, you have to have the people within the field give it a thumbs up, right? Otherwise, it's not considered to be real science. So in peer-reviewed journals, I have book chapters written on drug delivery mechanisms, multiple patents. So the reason I'm saying all of this is not to brag about myself, but to kind of give those audience and viewers who might not know me sort of a background as to the things that I'm saying and whether they hold any weight. Because one of the people that I really have become a little bit irritated with is a physician named Dr. Butter, who has made multiple videos creating just so much paranoia and junk that it really irritated me. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this live stream, is to go point by point to talk about the things he's mentioned in his videos and the reasons for this paranoia, and kind of address them, right? And if he ever gets to see this live stream, I am asking him in public to have a debate. Let's discuss the points that you've made, Dr. Butter, and I'm hopefully not pronouncing your name incorrectly, but let's sit down and address these in a public forum instead of hiding behind a YouTube video where you could spew all kinds of junk and say all kinds of nonsense science, and your credentials are not even up to par. Let's talk about these. Let's have a head-to-head debate. I am formally asking you to do this, and with the modern technology, it'll be really easy to set up a Zoom or a Skype meeting where we can have these debates. He is essentially capitalizing on people's fears, getting YouTube hits and getting views, and creating paranoia, and is pushing the people to do very dangerous things. And this is why it's really irritating. And I took it upon myself to essentially formally challenge him and discuss the things he said in his YouTube videos. So with that, this is the reason why I wanted to give my personal background, so that you guys could understand that I'm not coming from an average person's understanding of what's going on, but have really explored the topic. So let me try to shift to his actual CV. And I will try to put that on the screen so we can look at his credentials directly and see what this person is all about, right? So let's take a look at his personal CV. And let me see if I could actually put that on the screen. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can. Okay. Let's look at let's take a look at his actual CV, right? I will zoom this. This is the CV that I got directly from his website, and it is essentially his biographical background of what he has done. So he claims that he finished medical school, which is an osteopathic medicine, which is not an MD, but is a DO. I have many friends who are DOs who go on to be wonderful and amazing doctors and physicians. No knock on DOs, but first of all, he needs to address that he went to an osteopathic medicine, which is a different form of medical school, compared to the MDs that go through it. So he finished his, let's say, medical school in 1991, then did a year of translational rotation, which absolutely means that he probably did not match into a residency or could not get into residency. He says he did his internship with emphasis on general surgery. So he did a prelim year. After that, he says that he went on to do residency in general surgery. And there is no general surgery program that is less than 4 to 5 years. So in his CV, he talks about being a PGY2 or PGY3, which means only finishing 2 years of general surgery training, which nobody would give him a board certification for finishing that. Then he went on to do a rotation in a fellowship in preventive medicine, which again, I don't know what that means, because to go from a surgical training to preventive medicine fellowship just makes absolutely no sense. So he either didn't complete his full residency training or something happened. So he was never able to become a surgeon. He never practiced as a surgeon. He never finished his residency. And again, if I'm incorrect, I want him to formally address this. And then the rest of his CV goes on to say that he's a chief in the Department of Emergency Medicine. Nobody will give you a chief um, um, in the Department of Medicine without getting formal residency training in emergency medicine. So I don't know how he became chief or how he did all of this without getting board certification, right? So then he goes on to become a nutritional scientist. And so as you guys could see, he's jumping all over without finishing the training or without discussing his actual medical legitimacy. Now, he talks about being board certified. If we look at the board certifications, they're not in terms of the hardcore board certifications that we have. So if we look at his board certification, he is a diplomat of the American Academy of Preventive Medicine, a board of clinical medical toxicology. So as you guys could see here, it says diplomat candidate board certification in emergency medicine. So he probably never completed that. He doesn't have any actual board certification in any of the major medical societies or associations. So for him to come out and claim to be a practicing physician, I think is doing injustice to the people that are listening to his YouTube videos. And again, I'm not saying he must do all of this in order to have the ability to speak his opinion, but I think he should be honest about his background and his abilities before talking about why certain things are the way they are and creating panic and fear, right? And again, I hate to do this, and it goes against my beliefs and my principles to knock on somebody's training, because to me, it's always about who the person is, not necessarily their pedigree, because the pedigree could depend on so many different factors. But in this case, I needed to bring this up because he's had over a few million views, and people are assuming when he says, I'm a physician, I'm a doctor, I'm doing this and that he is actually trained and has the credentials to do this. And it's really irritating when you look at his own personal CV. It paints a completely different picture, right? So with that, I just wanted to sort of describe to you guys what was going on. Let me switch back to the actual show and sort of talk about those. So I just wanted to look at some of the questions you guys might have. I will address some of these questions before I continue. His name is Dr. Butter Suran. That's Rashid Butter, Buttar, and he's had and he has had a YouTube video in which I will dissect in a few minutes, where he talks about how the coronavirus pandemic is a hoax, is created by some nonsense, and how all of this is made up, and that the medical community is overblowing this, and how the virus doesn't exist. It's not caused by a virus, and he's advocating adding some selenium. And he goes on to talk about the current, I don't want to name it, but like a new cell phone technology that's come out, and how this is the cause of our failure of the immune system. So he's creating all of these nonsense, and he's advocating people to essentially go out and not pay attention to the recommendations and the issues that are being addressed by the medical community. So hopefully this answered your question. And again, his name is, I will type this out, Dr. Buttar, right? And so I wanted to look at one of his YouTube videos and discuss point by point the things that he's making. First of all, his terminology is completely off, right? And I've had multiple people send me this video and ask me why why aren't we talking about this in mainstream media, or why aren't more doctors talking about what this brilliant doctor is saying? Well, the reason we're not is because we don't want to give credibility to this, pardon my French, but to this moron who is creating fear and panic amongst the people, and is causing more trouble for the doctors that are on the front line trying to actually help the patients that are dying, right? So first of all, let's look at the point he makes. He says that this virus is a chimera. The word chimera is improperly used. Chimera means when you take genetic material or information from one animal and put it into a completely different animal. Or you take tissue from one animal and you put it into a different animal. For example, if I take stem cells from a human and I inject it into for example, a monkey, right? I've created a chimera. But he's saying that the virus is a chimera. No, it's not a chimera. Nobody took genetic material from one animal species to another, right? The virus is composed of multiple segments of genetic material from different pieces of other viruses, which I will address in a little bit. But this is not a chimera. It's still viral genetic material. And he calls these orthologs, right? Orthologs. The word ortholog doesn't belong here, because ortholog means when you have, let's say, for example, a protein from a human that's common to a protein that's found in a plant, for example, right? I'm giving you guys the big exaggeration. These two proteins are considered to be orthologs, which means they're very similar but belong to different animals and life, right? So one belongs to the plant, one belongs to a human. So these are orthologs. So he's saying, well, there are orthologs of viral material. No, the word ortholog doesn't make sense in this context whatsoever, right? So again, the reason I'm going point by point is because he likes to throw out these terminology to make it sound like he knows what he's talking about. But when you listen to him with a scientific mind, you realize that he's not making sense, right? Then he goes on to say that the virus doesn't really cause the disease. I want to ask Dr. Butter, how many patients has he himself treated personally, and therefore is saying that the virus doesn't cause the disease? Because I could show you hospital room after hospital room where people are literally dying because we can't stop the consequences of the infection, right? The virus is a direct link to various issues that happen within the individual, and the consequences of these are what ends up killing the person, right? So let us not listen to this nonsense that the virus isn't causing it. Now, the consequences of the virus, which can be debated in terms of whether it causes acute respiratory distress syndrome or whether it causes some kind of high altitude hypoxic sickness, that is being debated, because that will change the way we treat these patients. But those issues would not happen if the person did not become infected with the virus, right? The consequences of the way your immune system responds to the virus is what causes all of these issues that we are dealing with on a daily basis, and what ends up killing some of these patients, right? So let us not listen to that nonsense that the virus isn't the cause, and that there's some kind of because of let's say some new cell phone technology. I don't want to use that term only because YouTube and Facebook have a screening that will essentially screen out my video if I ended up using that term. But most of you guys know what I'm referring to, that is being created, this paranoia about because this new cell phone technology is coming out, it's suppressing our immune system. Is there evidence for any of that? Absolutely not. Can it potentially do it? Maybe. Who knows? Does it make scientific sense? No, not so much, right? Because we have much stronger cosmic rays coming from the universe that are bombarding us at every second of our lives. We're still okay, right? So to say that this new cell phone technology is suppressing the immune system and therefore this is what's nonsense. This is not what is happening, people. We have a real biological issue going on right here. And this is what's causing the sicknesses that we are seeing, right? So please don't fall for this nonsense. We are literally being fed uh, really bad science. So therefore, I wanted to address that point that yes, there is a direct link between the actual virus versus the disease, right? And then he goes on to create to create this massive paranoia about the vaccine development, and he talks about how hydroxychloroquine and zinc could boom magically treat the disease. Many of you guys that know me and have been following me on Facebook and have watched my updates, you guys know that I'm a big champion of the hydroxychloroquine being a drug that could potentially do this. Now, again, I'm saying this because I think it has potential. The data is still not concrete. We still need to do randomized controlled clinical trials to make sure that the drug is actually effective, right? So for him to come out and say, oh, we have 100% efficacy, so many millions of doctors have prescribed it, it works great, that is utter nonsense. As much as I want it to work and I believe could potentially work, to say that is an injustice. And it's creating false sense of security amongst the people that, hey, it's okay for me to go out and explore and do my daily stuff because, hey, if I get sick, there's hydroxychloroquine and zinc, boom, I'm going to get cured, right? That is not the case. And we need the clinical trials to hopefully show that we can fight this disease in some way with this drug, right? Now, he goes on to talk about creating a scare in the vaccines, right? The vaccines are taking 12 to 18 months to develop because we are doing our best to make sure that there are no side effects, that they don't harm people, right? And he says that, well, most of the people who had the flu vaccine are now being tested positive for COVID. Utter nonsense. These are two different viral species, right? One, and for him to say that because you've had the flu vaccine, you're going to test positive for the coronavirus is medically incorrect. Okay. Now, we're developing these vaccines because it is our only solution to absolutely overcome the pandemic. Without a vaccine, we don't have medications. We will not be able to contain and sustain this. So for him to already begin creating this scare about vaccines is doing medical malpractice in some ways, right? Because now we need to convince people that the vaccines are not going to kill you. They're there to actually keep us alive, keep the population of the people that are susceptible to this coronavirus, and make sure that they can actually be protected, right? So for him to initiate all of this fear mongering already from now, it's going to make it difficult for the medical community to battle this disease. So I urge you guys to think critically when you listen to him and not take every single word that he says into consideration. Okay. And therefore I really urge you guys to not to, even if you listen to him, think critically, right? What would be, for example, my personal gain in saying that the coronavirus vaccine will help us overcome it? What do I gain out of it? I want to disclose that I don't have any investment in or stock money in any of these things, right? Are there people who do? Yeah. Sure. I mean, this is what drives innovation. The ability to make money is what drives the innovation. The competition to be the first to make the vaccine because you're going to make the money is what's driving this innovation, right? Yeah, those people are going to make money, but as physicians, as medical societies, and community, we are overseeing these operations, right? If we see any harm, any detriment, we don't care that somebody's making money off of this. We will speak up, we will say it, we will make sure that things are done accurately and correctly. And remember, at the end of the day, every physician has an obligation to their patients. When you look at your patients in the eyes, you want to make sure that you are giving them the absolute best care. So I don't think there's a single physician, minus a few bad apples, which you really quickly get to be screened out, that we are doing the best for our patients. So right now, we need the vaccines to happen, if they will even happen, because there's some debate whether we can get a full vaccine and make it effective enough. And this is why when he comes out and says that Dr. Fauci is a farce, well, Dr. Fauci has many shortcomings and has some issues, which I don't want to address right now. But overall, he's done an amazing job, right? He has made sure that the medical community kind of pulls back on those forces that are trying to open the economy that could lead to a massive second wave, which will happen. We are going to get a second wave, and I'll address that in a few minutes. And therefore, Dr. Fauci is doing his best to kind of hold back the reins to make sure that we are not getting over flooded, and the pandemic gets really out of control. We've been able to hose the fire down a little bit, calm it down. You guys, the whole world has done an amazing job of doing the proper things, and I applaud you all. You guys all deserve a standing ovation for staying home, doing the right things to calm this virus down. Because people are saying, Jack, you and the other doctors and the epidemiologists are all saying millions of people dead. Well, let me tell you what, those would have happened if we didn't do the right things, right? Because we did the right things, we're not seeing the consequences of that. Instead of saying you guys were wrong, which is great. I don't care about being wrong in something that turns out to be a good outcome, right? Instead of criticizing that, why don't we applaud ourselves and say we did the right thing to hold back? And I want to tell you guys, we're not through. We're not through with this. And I'm part of a big medical community and forum on Facebook that is filled with healthcare professionals and medical doctors, respiratory therapists, nurses. So to kind of give you guys a perspective, I want to read a few comments that were done just today when we asked the medical community to share with us what is going on in each of their hospitals, right? Let me read you guys some of these concerns and some of the current up-to-date stuff that's going on, right? So here's one person. He works at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Long Island, New York. He says we are overrun with COVID-19 patient, 90 plus patients on ventilators. We are at 150% capacity. It is awful here. This is today, not yesterday, not a month ago. This is right now, right? I'm literally reading their post. The second one, Stony Brook, we have 356 patients, 107 of them are on ventilators. Do you guys know what proportion of people come off of a ventilator? The numbers are really grim. They're about 15 to 20 to 30% at the most, right? So when you have 107 people on ventilators, can you imagine the number of people that are being not able to come out of this? It's ridiculous, right? Let me read you another one from somewhere else, not New York, in Chicago, right? I have a friend who says, I work in the Chicago suburbs and we are full of COVID-19 patients. 2 ICUs, We're not talking about 2 ICU rooms. We're talking about 2 ICU floors are full of these patients on ventilators, right? Here's another one from Chicago. Another one working in the suburbs. 3 full COVID units are filled with hospitals, are filled with patients, getting more positive results than negative among those that are tested. So we're seeing more and more positive cases than negative. 2 ICU units full with mostly ventilated patients. And again, guys, I'm reading these right as they are being told on amongst the medical community. So for those of you who think that this is over and that we should go back, I urge you to reconsider this. Yes, I gave you guys hot spots, hot zones that are being currently overwhelmed, but at the same time, these hot spots could easily transfer to other areas of the country. Okay, so I've done enough ranting. Hopefully I've addressed some of these issues. Let me go look at some of the questions that, the comments that you guys had, and then I'll go back to finishing off some of my thoughts. Let me see. Can you, let's see what Lauren is saying. Can you speak more about the similarities and between the flu and COVID, so we can all better understand why the vaccine cannot be related in a causal way? Okay, very good question, Lauren. We had been asked this question many times. Why is the flu different than the COVID-19, right? So there are 2 things to consider here. One is the infection, let's say, strength of the virus, which means how infectious is the virus. In other words, if you became sick, how many people can you pass it on to, right? This is what's called the R naught in epidemiological terms. So this tells you how infectious the virus is. And the other one is how deadly is the virus. In other words, when you get the virus, what's the likelihood that it'll kill you, right? So to make comparisons, for example, the Ebola has a very small R naught, which means it's not very contagious. It doesn't spread really easily, but has a huge deadly rate, right? In other words, if you get the Ebola without any medical intervention or even some medical intervention, the chances of you dying is pretty bad, right? But the flu, on the other hand, right, is very contagious, right? It's not very contagious compared to COVID-19, which I'll get to, but because of vaccines, we're able to slow down the R naught significantly, right? Because of the vaccines for the flu, the chances that one person who has the flu to give it to another person who is not vaccinated is very low. So the virus has nowhere to jump. It's essentially stuck. It has no host to spread, right? Therefore, the R naught becomes low. But what's the deadliness of the flu? Well, we see that depending on the season, we get anywhere from 40 to, let's say, 35 to 45,000 people dying from the flu, right? And these numbers are a little bit, let's call that the best estimate, right? Now, how is COVID different than that? Well, because we don't have any vaccination or any kind of immunity in the population, the chances of COVID spreading from one person to another is very high. Now, in terms of the mortality rate, mortality will tell you how deadly the virus is. We won't know that full answer until we've screened the whole population to see how many people were infected and how many people died. Because this is what will give you the mortality rate. The people who died divided by the total number of people that are essentially infected. This ratio is what will give us the mortality rate. But because we haven't screened enough people in the population, we don't have a good estimate of the denominator. But what I could tell you is that people who end up hospitalized and being on a ventilator, their outcome is really grim. So yes, eventually, once we test the whole population, the overall mortality rate might be low, but what if it's high? We don't know that yet, right? What if only 10% of the population has so far been essentially tested, and the mortality rate will continue to be high? Do we want to take that risk? Do we want to essentially say, well, you know what? Who cares? Let grandpa and grandma, or the elderly, or the non-vaccinated, I mean, sorry, the immune compromised people die, just because we don't have that number, because that number could be really low. Even if it's really, really low, right? Let's say even if it's 1%, or let's say if it's 0.2%, right? We are what, 300 million people, right? So if you guys do the math, you could see that we can essentially have close to 1 million people die if we don't do the measures that we're doing. Well, you're going to look at me and say, why aren't we seeing millions of people die? Because we're doing social distancing. We have very strict measures and guidelines. Let me tell you guys this. If we had those specific guidelines and strict measures, guess what? We would probably not see the flu, right? We would probably get zero mortality from the flu. So to compare it to the flu is kind of doing apples and oranges in some sense. Although, yes, it's not going to be as deadly as the Ebola, but we don't have these strict measures come every flu season. If we did, we would not see 40,000 people die, right? Yes, so the numbers of corona are looking better and better, and epidemiologists are looking more and more incorrect because we're doing the right things. So people need to understand this, that we're seeing the results by not seeing the death, right? So to go to your question, what is the similarity between the flu and COVID-19, right? In terms of the vaccine, well, the flu is a different species, right? We're building an immune response against different proteins all together in the flu virus, right? COVID-19 is a different animal, not an animal, metaphorically a different beast, right? So the proteins that it has and the stuff that your immune system is attacking are going to be completely different proteins. So there is no cross reactivity, right? And the tests that we're doing specifically test for the genomic material of the COVID. So there is no cross reactivity that he talks about. This is complete. It makes no scientific, it makes no logical sense that I just want to rip my brains out about the professors he's had that taught him basic immunology 101, right? So hopefully that addressed your question. If it did, please let me know. If not, I could talk about that. Let me see. Let's look at this question. I received my that had COVID in late December. Yes, it was severe and far from flu, but as deadly as it felt with quarantine, I self-healed with IV, filled with tons of vitamin. Yes, Ani, you might have had a very good immune system and you fought it off because you're a healthy young person. Now, this same COVID-19 infection in a slightly older, with somebody that has background issues in terms of health issues, obesity or diabetes or hypertension, could have literally caused them to die, right? So you got lucky, and I applaud you for doing the right things and actually getting tested, because now not only can you be essentially more free to go out into the public, but you could also become a donor for a form of treatment called convalescent plasma. People who have been infected and have recovered, we can now potentially take their immune plasma from their blood and transfer it into patients who are dying, and essentially transfer your immunity and the immune system you built to people that are sick and help them recover. So you can potentially start donating plasma to help save thousands of lives. And in fact, these studies are started in the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, down in UT, Houston Methodist. So these are great. And those of you who had it should be tested. That way you can become free. And again, I'll get into how we could potentially open the economy, but this is one of the ways to go into it. Let's see. I'm sorry. I'm getting a lot of questions, so I'll try to address from the bottom up. Let's see what Darlene had. She said, once the surface is disinfected, how long is it safe to touch it? For instance, a pin pad at a store, once you disinfect, does it stay safe for a certain amount of time, or do you have to disinfect after every person touches it? Again, good question. We've gone over this about cleaning the surfaces and whatnot, but unless somebody comes in and literally sneezes on there, or puts their mucus or their saliva on the touchpad, the virus isn't going to jump out of their body and come onto the touchpad. So once you've disinfected it, let's say a couple of times, or if you see somebody who literally sneezed into their hand and touched the touchpad, I would disinfect it after that. But for the most part, the virus isn't going to stick there and survive for eons, right? So unless people are being completely idiotic, sneezing onto one another, or putting their hands into their mouth when they're sneezing and then touching stuff, we're not going to see any of those issues. So hopefully that addressed your question. Let's see. What about herbs, ginger, turmeric, garlic? Very good question, Baron Kevork. So all of these things that you guys are talking about, herbs, ginger, homemade remedies, I'm not going to say that they're necessarily beneficial, but they can't hurt, right? If it makes you feel better, if it makes you feel good, and you, if some of these could potentially have like pro-immune components to it, do it. But don't think that just because you're doing these things, you're absolutely protected against the virus, because even with a absolutely healthy system, you could potentially become infected and the consequences could be bad, right? So again, I urge you guys to do these things only because it makes you feel better. But again, don't have this false sense of security that because you're doing these things, you're completely protected, right? So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, let's see. Can you speak some more reports out of South Korea with regards to reinfection? Great question. I was going to go into this, right? A lot of people have been asking me, Jack, is it possible to become reinfected, right? The answer right now is no, or inconclusive. Let me talk about the study that came out of South Korea, right? How do we test people? On another show, I described the two different testing modalities, right? And I'll go into it again just really quickly so that the people who hadn't seen it can be caught up with it. The current testing is we use what's called polymerase chain reaction, right? PCR, to test for the viral genetic material. In other words, the virus has a genetic material that it uses to replicate and build more copies of itself, right? So this genetic material that the virus uses is called RNA, ribonucleic acid. And what we do is when we take a swab of your nose or the back of your throat and we isolate the virus, we then amplify this signal to see if there's a signal. If we amplify and there's nothing, you're negative. If we amplify and there was genetic material, it means that you have the virus, right? So we're using polymerase chain reaction to amplify the viral genetic material to see if there's the virus or not, right? But what's one caveat of this, right? What's one of the things we have to make sure is that in your nose, in your throat, whatever, you could have remnants of this genetic material hanging around, but you don't have the full virus, right? In other words, the virus could have broken into pieces with its genetic material floating around. So you could have cleared the virus, but had some genetic material kind of hanging around in your nose, mouth, whatever, right? So that if I go back and test for this genetic material, because that's what our testing does, guess what happens? You may look like you're positive again, but are you really positive for the virus? No, you're positive for its genetic material. So in this study out of Korea, what they did was they took people who had the virus, their symptoms got better. So they're like, well, they cleared the virus, so let's go back and test them again. Well, they tested for the genetic material and some of them came back positive. Are you surprised? No, you could have had some of that genetic material hanging around in the body, right? So of course, if I do a genetic test, it's going to look like positive. But guess what? When you try to culture viruses from these individuals, meaning, okay, if the person really has a virus, if I isolate the virus in a petri dish and allow it to grow, I should see viral particles, right? Guess what happened? No viruses grew, right? So what does that mean? It's the genetic material that's left over that they're detecting, not the virus. So far, there has not been a single case report where the person got better, had the virus, was documented to have corona, got better 4 or 5 months later, had the symptoms, and tested positive for the actual virus. So for now, the data to show that there's reinfection is none. It doesn't exist. Can it potentially reinfect just like the flu sometimes? Possibly. But do we have data at the moment to show it? Absolutely not. So hopefully this addressed your question, Lucy. Let's take a look at Ani's question. The most common conspiracy that I've seen is that Bill Gates wants to use microchips in vaccines to ID us and for the government to control us. They have created a lot of paranoia. Thank you so much for bringing this up, because this was something else that Dr. Butter was talking about, and it really irritated me. Why would you put microchips in a vaccine, right? You could put it in any other thing if they wanted to, right? Put it in the water, goddammit, and nobody would know. So it's idiotic to say that we need to vaccinate people to put the microchip in them, right? So let's not get into this conspiracy issue, because it makes no sense. Again, Bill Gates is Bill Gates and has his issues, which I don't want to discuss personally, but to take a vaccine that will literally help save millions and millions of lives and connect that to some kind of a conspiracy story made up about Bill Gates and microchips and that they're implanting these into people is utter nonsense. You can't take two things that seem suspicious, bring it together and say, oh, look, these two things make sense, right? So please, guys, stay away from these things. Watch it for entertainment purposes. They're great things to watch and kind of say, hey, I love the imagination of and the creativity of the human mind that could come up with such other nonsense. I wish that creativity and imagination could be used to solve more real world problems, right? So let's see what Daniel is asking. Doctor on Fox said the virus hangs around in the air for hours. Is that true for hours? Listen, this is a loaded question, and it depends what time of the day, what time of the year, because the virus, we know that, so the virus itself is made up of a protein shell, right? Inside of it, it has its genetic material, and outside of the virus is a coating of fat, a lipid membrane, right? Now, this lipid membrane is very susceptible to UV rays, is very susceptible to ethanol, right? This is why we're saying you could just use very high level ethanol sanitizer to get rid of the virus, or soap. The soap dissolves those fat particles and gets rid of it. Now, can the virus survive for hours in the air? Potentially, right? But what does that have any consequence in terms of you, right? Well, unless somebody sneezed really, really strongly and that particle was hanging around in that area for hours and hours and hours, and you walk right into it and took a nice deep breath, and all of those viral particles came in and started to lay their ground on you, what does that mean? It means nothing, right? And so, yes, theoretically, we could show that the virus could travel 13 feet. But realistically speaking, that will happen only if a major opera singer or some kind of a person like a swimmer with huge lungs takes a deep breath and like literally with all his or her force just sneezes it out. It's not going to travel 13 feet. Is it possible? Yeah, but is it probable? No. So Again, to create this paranoia that yes, it could hang around for hours and hours, but yeah, you could show viral particles here and there, but is it practical? Does it should it change our way of life that dramatically? No. I think that if you're going outside, I know certain cities and states have made it mandatory to wear a mask. That should be enough to cover you from all of that. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about that data because it doesn't really have practical consequences for long term, right? Hopefully that addressed your question. Um, let me see. Have Let's see Sylvia's question. Have studies been microanalyzed to a level that shows stats on which pre-existing conditions have been most detrimental to fighting off COVID, diabetes, heart disease? Again, yes, they've multiple studies have been done to show the 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 pre-existing conditions that are bad for you. Again, the ones you've mentioned are the main ones. Obesity is becoming really, really a big issue. Diabetes, heart disease is a major issue. Again, if you're generally in a sick condition, your body's immune system has problems, you're not going to be able to fight it, right? So all of these major healthcare problems that are existing right now, heart disease, diabetes, these are the problems that go along with you being able to fight the infection. And again, most of these pre-existing conditions will make you susceptible to other kinds of infections that will make you sick and have a hard time fighting, right? Baron Kevork again. What about blood type? Is it true that yes, there's been some studies showing that I believe blood type O is more protective and A is more susceptible. And again, this has to do with mechanisms that are kind of poorly understood, but there's always these kinds of studies. And again, for the general population, knowing these facts doesn't really help you much because you are stuck with whatever blood type you have. Even if you have the one that's protective, it doesn't mean that it's a guarantee you will not get the virus. So you should continue doing these recommendations of washing your hands, of making sure you don't touch your face and nose and mouth with your dirty hands, and if possible, if you're going outside, wearing a mask, which again is a debatable topic, right? Okay, let me scroll up to some of the questions up top and see if there are any. Let's see Babak's question. I've heard that doctors are opting to treat patients by putting them on oxygen and laying on stomach instead of using ventilator. Does this help the overwhelming hospital and ventilator? Very great question and a very insightful question, Babak. Again, there's a debate as to the mechanism of the respiratory failure. For the most part, initially, we believe that it is what's called acute respiratory disease syndrome, and that is that disease is essentially when your lungs are filled with fluid and gunk, so that when you take a deep breath, you can't oxygenate yourself, right? And so what we would do is put them on a ventilator and cause a positive pressure to come into the lungs to prevent the collapse of the lung when you exhale, right? But there were some reports that maybe they're just being hypoxic. So in conjunction with that, in doing the ventilation, what we're doing is also putting the patients in a prone position. What it means to be in a prone position is exactly what you're saying, on a stomach. And how does that work physiologically, right? Physiologically, imagine that this is the person standing up and looking towards us, right? We have gravity pulling the fluid down. Now, if we put the patient on his or her back, right? What ends up, let me put it this way. When the person is put on his or her back, all of that gravity is going to pull the fluid down to the parts of the lungs that are getting good oxygenation. But the problem is, because there's fluid, the oxygen can't diffuse. So by putting the person on its stomach, what we're doing is pulling the fluid down so that the areas of the lung that have a lot of oxygen coming through, those are the areas that are going to get good perfusion of the blood. So the area that has all the fluid and it's not getting good oxygenation isn't being an issue, so that the patient now gets good perfusion and good oxygenation. So we're essentially, you could think of it as like we're reshunting the blood from areas that are good perfused with oxygen. I mean, from areas that are bad perfused with oxygen to areas with good perfusion. And this is helping. Yes, we've been doing this. And again, this doesn't mean we're not going to need ventilators. We're still going to need it. There are certain groups of people who think that maybe hyperbaric oxygenation could help, but again, these are preliminary and not yet conclusively proven. So we need more studies before we shift from ventilators away from the ventilators. So we will definitely need these, and we need to continue using the ventilators. And again, certain settings on the ventilators could also be tweaked, but for the meantime, we absolutely need ventilators to continue this until we've found other ways of treatment. But very good question, because this is very much debated in the medical community as well. Let me take a look at some of the other questions that people have had. Okay. Let's see. I was hoping that one of you were going to discuss about the nonsense. Yes. Hello, Takui. Hopefully, you saw the beginning part of the show. And if you have any other questions related to this Dr. Butter, please let me know, because I think I've hit upon the major points that he is mistaken. And again, I'm openly asking him for a debate if he wants to. Let's discuss this, and maybe he has points, which I don't think so, but let's discuss it so that he feels good about the stuff that he's spewing is all nonsense, right? Okay. Let's also see. Can you speak to that? Let's look at Suran's other question. Whenever you get to it, can you speak to the antigen testing done in Santa Clarita County? And that talks about herd immunity. Great question, Suran. This was one of the topics that I wanted to go into when discussing about how to reopen the economy, right? So what Suran is referring to is a study that came out. I'll go into is a study that came out of Santa Clarita, where Stanford researchers screened for the percent of people that are that have had the infection and are currently infected, to take a look at a snapshot of what is the prevalence of the COVID-19 infection in the population, right? And what they found was that, oh my God, there's a high percentage of people that have the virus, and therefore we've developed enough herd immunity, right? And therefore it's good to start going back. What were the problems with these studies, right? I even posted a link to this study on my Facebook, but then when looking at it more closely, here's the problem with this study. And again, the idea of doing this was great and their intention was great, but the execution was bad, right? What do I mean by that? First of all, how did they recruit people to do this study? It was via Facebook, right? So there was already an ascertainment bias in that. I mean, you're asking a group of people on Facebook to come and give their blood to do antigen testing, right? Well, think about it. The sick or the ones, the elderly, or people that don't have internet or don't have Facebook, you're not accounting for them, right? So is this a true snapshot of the general public? I would venture to say no. Moreover, what they did was they then said, well, we're going to divide this into a county by county. So for example, if from county A, right, they had 2 people show up, one of them tested positive and the other one negative, they said, well, this means 50% of that county is got the virus. So 50% herd immunity. Does that make any logical sense to you, to base the whole county's herd immunity on 2 people, right? Because random sampling tells you that, you know, the people that showed up were probably the healthy asymptomatic ones. So the ones that were sick or not stayed home, or the ones that they thought they had symptoms, so these were the ones that more likely came, because the people who never had symptoms, chances of them to come and give their blood for this is going to be lower, right? So the number of people that you're actually measuring could be biased towards the ones that are actually positive, and so you're getting a false sampling of the population. In terms of the testing that they use the serological test, right? A few minutes ago, I talked about the viral genomic testing, right? I said we test for the viral genome. The serological test tests for the other side. So if we have the virus, when the immune system develops a response, we form what are called antibodies against the virus, right? And the antibodies are used to fight a viral infection. So the serological test will test the immune side of the coin, essentially, right? The RNA, the genomic testing that we're doing, the PCR, will test for the viral genome, whereas the antibody will test for your body's immune response to the virus itself, right? There are two kinds of antibodies that are formed. Initially, when you start forming an immune response, you form what's called IgM antibodies. And as the immune response becomes stronger and stronger, you go from an IgM to an IgG response, right? So by measuring the levels of IgM and IgG antibody, we could tell whether you're in the early phase of the infection, or if you have mostly IgGs, it means you've cleared the virus and now you're essentially in the late phase, right? But the problem is the testing that we're doing right now, measuring for these specific antibodies, are not 100% validated. What that means is when we say your virus levels are high or low, where do we put this line? What's considered to be high virus antibody level? What's considered to be low viral antibody levels, right? We're still trying to figure out what this measuring stick, the ruler marks on this measuring stick should be. If we were thinking about it in analogous to a ruler, what are these measuring marks before we can say this is high, this is low, this is intermediate, this is medium, right? So those serological tests are still being developed, and this is why I'm asking people to be patient, right? These things, again, are happening at a lightning speed, but it does still take time. This is why we need more patience from you guys. So overall, from that study, what we could say is that we need more of those kinds of studies, and I applaud them for doing a first effort to try to get some of this information, but their execution was a little bit off, and we need to be a little bit cautious when we then apply to the general public what the overall herd immunity is in the population, right? So that leads me to my topic of how do we essentially go back to reopening the economy. I want to share with you guys another document from the Infectious Diseases Society of America, where they literally just released it today, and they talk about the 6 to 8 different things that we need to have in place in order to start reopening the economy. Now, this might not sound good for some people's ears, and I get it. People are antsy and anxious and want to go back, right? But what are the things we need? We need for our serological tests to be completely trustworthy and validated. And we need a lot of these serological tests because, as the study that Sudan pointed out, we need to do this on a bigger level, right? We need to do this on bigger hotspots of America. We need to do this in certain non-hotspots to see what the overall herd immunity is. If we then see that significant number of people had been exposed, cleared it, and are better, and there's a good enough immunity in the population, and it's going to depend on what region of the country you're in, what state, what city, what county, we can then slowly start to kind of open up the faucet for this. The other thing we need is guarantee that we have enough manpower to do this. Also, we need guarantee from your city, your state, your I would say even your little I would say this belongs to more of the mayor level thing because it's going to depend on county and county, but each county has to guarantee that, hey, if there's a small outbreak in a school or in a nursing home, that we have the manpower to go and contain it. In other words, do contact tracing to see who each of those people interacted with and quarantine those people for the 7 to 10 days that they have to be. So in order to do this, we need manpower, right? We need people to be there to able to execute this. And for that, you need it to be not just on a country level, but not even state level or city level, but on a more of a county level, right? We need our mayors to guarantee us this, that we have the manpower to do this contact tracing. We have the ability to do the shutdown in areas that need to happen, right? And we need to have enough testing to be able to say what the general immunity is in the population, right? Without these, I feel uncomfortable saying, well, economy is tanking, we've flattened the curve, which doesn't have to stay flat. As soon as we open it, it could go right back up, right? It could. So let's not destroy all of these months of great effort by everybody's part just because the last minute we're rushing into it, right? We need these things to happen. And I know there's already protests, people going out without, guys, this is dangerous, right? We should not be afraid of the coronavirus, right? I'm not telling you to be scared like deer in the headlights. We should be cautious. We should be doing things methodically. We should be thinking about our next step and the consequences it could lead to. So let us not jump the gun here and destroy everything we've built. Hospitals are finally able to handle the situation, but at what cost, though, right? We've essentially pushed off all of the other diseases, all of the quote unquote non-medical emergencies, so we could contain this, right? There's cost associated with that. I get it. And as a physician, yes, there are patients who need their aneurysms clipped, or they need their heart attack situations addressed. There's people with chronic diseases. So in order for us to be able to maintain what we're doing right now, we've had to push off all of these. So this goes to my other point, that when people are showing empty hospital rooms and empty hospitals, think about it, guys. Of course they're going to be empty because we've pushed away all of these other patients out because we're expecting COVID patients to overwhelm the system, right? Imagine if we allowed all of these other patients to come in, people that would normally go to the ER are staying home. If we did that on top of the COVID, the hospitals, the whole country would be overrun, right? So don't let these fake pictures. Of course, there are certain hotspots that are worse, even with pushing off all these patients, they're still overrun. I read you guys stories directly from patients just right now, from doctors, right? So let's not be misled by some guy with the camera going and specifically recording. Are there parts of the country that are doing great? Yes, there are parts of the country that are seeing barely any patients. Should these areas be opened up? Yes, once we do some sampling of that region and see that they've had enough immunity and that the people can be contained just in case there's a breakout, by all means, let's open up that economy in that area. But to say that it's fake, that there's no hospitals overrun, it's utter nonsense. Don't fall for this. And these are the steps we need in order to slowly open up the economy, right? Hopefully that addressed some of your questions. Let's see. Can you speak about some reports? Okay, I've already done that. Those excuse me, Babek, does the BCG vaccine provide some protection? Yeah, hi, Babek. Again, I addressed this in another one of my videos with Dr. Soni. Epidemiological studies are showing that if you've had the BCG, it actually provides some level of protection. Again, every time I say that there's something that provides protection, I don't want people to be misled that this because I've had X, Y, and Z, that means I'm going to be completely protected, and therefore I should be safe to go out and do as I please. No, it's just a matter of giving you slightly more reassurance that you're going to be okay. Not 100%, but you're going to be okay. And based on these epidemiological data, they have started actual BCG vaccination trials to see if maybe in the interim between now and until we have an actual COVID-19 vaccine, maybe we can use the BCG, which we've already done the preliminary safety testing. We could use this as sort of a stopgap. So yes, that is very exciting, and it's very, very hopeful that it should work, because if it does, it'll give us a stopgap until we've developed a full-on vaccine, right? Again, let's see. Let me look at, in your opinion, what indicators should they be looking for specifically when deciding to end the vaccine? Very good question, Sarah. I don't think there's going to be an individual indicator. I don't think we can't wait for the vaccine. I'll be honest, because as much of a cautious person I am that says, hey, we need to be a little bit more cautious. Waiting for the vaccine 12 to 18 more months, it's not. Again, we're not just talking about the medical opinion. We got the companies. We have people who. There's a lot of consequences of quarantining, right, or of social distancing, like depression, mental health, child abuse, and all kinds of stuff that is happening. So yes, to drag this on for another 12, 18 months is impractical. I will say this from the beginning. So no, vaccine development should not be the indicator. The indicator, like I mentioned earlier, should be, can we do the testing? Can we do contact tracing so that we can essentially close any kind of flare-ups in any part of the country? Do we have the manpower to do this, right? Can the governors, can the mayors provide these reassurance? Can the president, can the federal government provide this reassurance that they will, in conjunction with whatever the mayor, the governor is doing, that the federal government will step in and provide either ventilators, PPEs, all of these in order to help the local the local government. So in terms of indicators, I would say we have to do snapshot testing, serological, to see who's had it, who's immune to it, who's infected, to get a better percentage, an idea of each of the areas. And then based on those numbers, if there's a significant number of people that have been exposed and recovered, slowly those areas could start opening, right? But if you see that there's a huge number of death rates in that area because that area contains people that are more susceptible, I would be wary of saying, hey, you're ready to go. I don't think New York is ready, right? New York, I just read that their hospital systems are overwhelmed. If we open up the economy and people start rushing into the hospital for their pimple that needs to be, extracted or whatever, we're going to get swamping of the hospital system and overrun. So New York, for example, should not be. There are certain parts of Montana that are doing really good, right? Maybe because they're in isolation, they did the social isolation early enough. Those areas, once they check those numbers, good for them. Let them start back up, right? Chicago, for example, I would say I'm on the fence. We're still a long ways away from it. We also need guarantee from the government at all levels that we're going to have protective equipment for physicians, right? Because once you open up the economy, you're also opening up doors to other health diseases to start rushing into the hospital. So you can't just allocate all your resources to COVID anymore. So you need more protective equipment, because now you have different kinds of diseases that you need to address in conjunction with COVID, right? So all of these things need to be guaranteed. The stockpile needs to be above what we need in order for this to do it, right? All right. Let's see. Let me see if I have any more questions, and if not, I think I want to end. If there are no more questions, I want to end this with a couple of last thoughts, and hopefully this has been helpful for some of you. And again, I really needed to address some of these conspiracy issues going on. Again, the virus is caused by the disease is caused by a virus. Don't let anybody say otherwise. Exactly where did the virus come from? That's a good question, right? That's something that still needs to be addressed. Was it made in a laboratory? Again, potentially, and I'm saying this very cautiously, because there are people studying these viruses for the sheer idea of learning how these things operate, so that when things like this happen, we have some level of understanding of how to stop this. So yes, there are laboratories that are studying these kinds of viruses. Could somebody unintentionally spill the vial or contaminate themselves and walked out not knowing and caused the viral pandemic? Potentially, yes. Are these viruses being cut and pasted with different genetic techniques to help figure out how the virus works? Yes, these things are being done at very high contained laboratories. Could somebody have not paid attention and things could have led to this? Yes. Could it have come from a natural jump of either from a stray dog, a bat, a pangolin to an animal, to another animal, and then to a human? Potentially. We don't know the source of the virus just yet, right? And at this point, this is something for scientists and doctors and epidemiologists and virologists to figure out in the next coming months and years. But for you guys, don't let these issues kind of push you to the conspiracy that this was intentionally done and it's there to control population. And again, if you look at the areas that are affected economically, politically speaking, it makes absolutely no sense, right? So don't let the unknown, because we don't have the answers yet, persuade you to start gravitating towards the conspiracy, right? Because we don't have an answer doesn't mean the crazy is the answer, right? So let's be critical, let's think, and let's stay positive, not COVID positive, but let's stay mentally positive. And I want to say that take this seriously. I've mentioned it many times. We need to take it seriously, but let's not be scared at the same time. We will come out of this. It'll get better. The measures are being done. We may see a second peak come December, November. And again, I read a paper published in Science with certain caveats that this could be a cyclical thing for the next few years, 3-4 years, right? And again, doing the social distancing is not going to be practical for that long. But in the meantime, hopefully we'll have a virus so that when these third, fourth waves and peaks come in, we will have vaccines that will prevent a major breakout, right? So don't be scared. Continue living normal post, COVID normal life. Things will get better once I think these measures that I mentioned, the economy starts opening up. You guys will start feeling better. I know there's a lot of people feeling depressed, antsy, but try to find creative ways to spend your time. Learn how to paint, right? This is something that although not much time, but I wanted to force myself to learn how to do certain things in the meantime. Find hobbies, find things. There are many things you could do to keep the mind. Heck, there might be papers you could read to critically analyze yourself. Learn a new thing, right? If you think the epidemiological data is lying to you, learn some epidemiology. Take the time to understand what these numbers mean and make a critical decision and figure it out yourself. There's nobody holding you back, and the YouTube world is filled with great content that you can learn a lot of amazing things. Take the opportunity to learn, grow yourself. And as one of my great teachers, Mr. Kiley, said, when faced with this kind of adversity, grow, learn to do things, expand your horizons, expand your mind, expand your imagination, and come out of it a lot better than you went in. So don't allow this to shackle you and make you feel like I can't do this because I don't have X, Y, and Z, right? So having said that, let me see if there are any questions that I haven't answered. The last major question, what about California? Again, like I mentioned, the measures and the things that need to be happened, if they can guarantee those things, then I think California should be able to start back up. And again, without these answers, without these numbers, it's like, here's the analogy I want to give, and a friend of mine said this, and I think it's a beautiful analogy. If I gave you 100 M&Ms and I said two of them inside have cyanide, right? How many of you guys would be willing to start eating from those M&Ms, right? And the two is the percentage of people that can be essentially the mortality rate, right? If I had 100 M&Ms and I said start eating them, and two of them have cyanide that will kill you, would you be willing to open up those boxes of, or that bag of M&Ms and start eating? If you are, man, Vegas loves you because you're a gambling person, right? I personally would. I don't like M&Ms, but either way, I would choose not to. Would you? Let me end it with this gem of a question. Would you get vaccinated as one is made available? Yes, right? If the virus, if the vaccine goes through the proper testing, phase one, testing for issues related with safety and all those concerns, goes through phase two and is ready to be rolled out, sign me up for that vaccination, right? Assuming, because I'm a healthcare worker, we don't already become one of those people that they tested on, because for prophylactic reasons, healthcare workers might be the first line of people who get it. So yes, sign me up. I want to be protected. I want to make sure that I am not able to pass this on to my patients. I want to make sure that I don't pass it on to my loved ones and my family and all my friends. So yes, you guys have heard me publicly say this. If and when the vaccine comes out, I will be the first person to essentially get it. And I urge you guys to also consider doing it. And I will talk more about it as the development happens, right? So with that, I want to thank all of you guys for listening and coming on to the show. Hopefully we've addressed some of the questions. Please share this with your family and loved ones if you think they need some retooling and education on the information on the coronavirus. And please, if you guys have enjoyed it, I will definitely continue doing these episodes, but please share this. And if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go ahead and smash that subscribe button at Side Talks 2.0, so that when there are new videos and episodes coming up, I'm in the process of trying to get all kinds of different specialists to do a guest speaker videos with. A person who runs clinical trials has promised to come out and do a show. And then I have physicians in the different fields, like in neurosurgery and anesthesiology, to talk about their challenges of the coronavirus. So I will definitely be doing those. So please don't forget to smash that subscribe button, like button, share it with your family and friends. And if you have any questions, please ask them below or on the YouTube channel. Drop a comment, and in the next one, I will hopefully try to do one of these every Sunday and address those specific questions. I will put them on my list of things, and I will address them. And of course, I will have another episode with Dr. Priya Soni, the infectious disease physician, to talk about her perspective again in the next few days. So I will keep trying my best to update you guys. And in the meantime, please think wisely, think smart. Don't allow this chaos to cloud your judgment, and stay away from some of these fake stories and news. And again, Dr. Butter, if you see this, or if somebody shares it and he sees this, I'm challenging you to a one-on-one debate on any public forum. And that way we can have a more healthy, fruitful discussion. So with that, I want to thank all of you guys and appreciate your time, and stay healthy, be patient, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. And with that, God bless all of you.